Hello, hello, everybody. My name is Izzy. I go by they, them pronouns, and I am here with my lovely partner, Matthew.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be talking about accessibility in gaming, where is it available, how we encounter it, and why is it important. So, starting with where it is available, Xbox is at the top of the game with features that include the adaptive controller, which is essentially a custom controller that allows for more accessible play, accessibility feature tags in the shop, so you know what accessibility features a game has before you buy it, Copilot, which is where you can use two controllers, button mapping, you map out the buttons, keyboard and mouse support, a narrator, night mode, high contrast captioning, a magnifier, speech to text, transcription, and even voice commands. So it's got quite a bit.
The really cool thing about these is that they are all exactly what they sound like.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to figure out what they do. And a lot of these, from the narrator on, are all in the same spot in the settings. So they're pretty easy to figure out if the first thing that you do is you go into the settings. And the fun thing about the Xbox is that I believe the speech to text is on from the very beginning and you have to choose to turn it off. So if you are blind or visually impaired and you set up an Xbox, it's already there. So that's really cool. So the PlayStation has a little bit less, but it's still up there. And according to the website, the PS5 console offers a range of customizable display and sound features, including zoom, color correction, adjustable text size, mono audio for headphones, and more. They also have a screen reader and closed captioning, transcription, and button mapping. So pretty similar to the Xbox, but just a little bit less. And unfortunately, the Switch, the third of the big three consoles, has none. It says that it has button mapping, but it's more of a reset in case anything goes wrong with your button mapping. In fact, an article from Able Gamers states that it's quite inaccessible overall. The biggest issue is the Joy Cons, which are just a nightmare for anybody with mobility issues, let alone anybody using them for just a prolonged period of time. I know, Matt, you play the Switch a lot. You can probably attest to that.
I do, and I can. Yeah, it uses the Joy Cons. They're those little controllers that separate from the console itself. Just in case the listeners don't know that. But yeah, no, the Switch itself is the only one that I actually have, which is why it's the only one I've made any comments on. Uh, and the accessibility issues I've had with it, there aren't many of them, frankly, on a console level, because I don't need the sort of things that are usually done on a console level, like, video descriptive service or things like that. Uh, if I ever need to do anything with accessibility, it's usually on a game by game basis. And the cool thing about that is that usually the games are pretty good about it. But the bad thing about that is that if they aren't, I'm out of luck.
Yeah, the one good thing about Xbox and PlayStation having it on a console level is that if the individual game doesn't have it, then you still have it there. Because there is a wide variation among games. I found that indie games tend to have better accessibility than AAA.
But
But when
also
AAA,
smaller ranges.
yeah, but when AAA does have accessibility, it's usually pretty good. Speaking of which, we did talk about a AAA game. I believe it was Last of Us 2 that somebody was able to play blind. We
Yeah,
watched a
that was
video.
crazy.
We watched a video, which I will put the link to in the description, that talked about accessibility in gaming. And what do you think about it? Oh, I said, what do you think about it?
Oh, sorry. I thought you said the video talks about accessibility in gaming and what you think about it. I was like, all right, that's a weird way to phrase that, but okay. My bad. Anyway, I thought the video was pretty cool. Like I said, I think, goodness, sorry. My favorite thing about it was probably the guy they mentioned. I think he has a YouTube channel, but either way, because of this variety of accessibility options that The Last of Us 2 had, including audio descriptive services and unique sound mapping. And my favorite was there's a cliffside thing that keeps you from accidentally walking off cliffs, which, as someone who can see, is something I would like in most games I play. Um, anyway, this guy who is blind was able to play and beat The Last of Us 2 which I thought was really cool. I'd never heard of that before. Um, but on a more general sense, yeah, the video did outline points pretty similar to this, just sort of talking about general accessibility points across platforms. And I'm going to let you summarize the video before I give my thoughts because this is your assignment. Oops, my bad. Sorry.
All right. The video goes over a couple different accessibility features, such as like colorblind accessibility features, being able to change the contrast, being able to change mapping. It also talks a little bit about difficulty and why that might be an accessibility feature. For example, somebody with processing issues may need slower combat or things like aim assist in order to help out and make a game more accessible, because a game shouldn't be entirely impossible to beat, even if it should be challenging. Another thing that they talk about is audio cues and color washing, just a whole variety of different samples of ways that the games in 2020 were accessible to anybody.
And unfortunately, some of the ways that they weren't, because not every game had all those things. But I will say the other interesting thing I thought about on that video was that a couple of the things that it mentioned were things that I didn't even really consider as accessibility options until I watched the video and I went, oh, right, that's what those are for. Because, you don't need to have hearing impairment to enjoy subtitles in games. Like when I'm playing games on my TV late at night, I usually have it on mute or at incredibly low volume just so I don't wake up my roommates, right? And it's cool to have subtitles so I can see what the people are saying. Or if I'm like listening to music, like a lot of these options, part of the reason that they're so standard, I think, is because not just are they accessibility options, but they make the game more pleasant or things like that, or like adjusting the brightness and the contrast. Like that's just a good thing to have because it helps make things more accessible for people with disabilities and for people without disabilities. It's just general accessibility. And I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like the concept of universal design, where you kind of make it with everybody in mind. And the thing about subtitles too is it's subtitles are really just like the foundation, because they, like with my auditory processing disorder, sometimes I won't understand things that are said without those subtitles, even if I have it on full volume so loud that like it's impossible for me not to hear.
Or
I
with
just won't
my
process
house
it.
full of siblings, I
Yeah.
sometimes don't hear things because there's other things happening. Like I said, it cuts both ways, right? It's both an accessibility thing and just an ease of consumption thing because it makes it more pleasant. If you design something with everybody in mind, everybody's going to like it.
Yeah, so that's a really fun thing. And then another thing that I wanted to talk about is some games that we play with accessibility features. I know Slime Rancher has high contrast text, it has a very visible UI. What about some games that you play?
I've joked about this with you before. I always say that I like games that hate you for playing them. So honestly, a lot of the games I play are very challenging, which is why the difficulty thing I thought was an interesting point in the video. The idea that having different scales of difficulty makes it easier for people with, say, processing issues, or the other reason that they're there, right? People who are just new to the game, right? Like even if you're good at playing video games, Doom Eternal is going to beat you mercilessly if you try to play it at the hardest mode immediately. But no, some of the games that I really like, Hotline Miami is one, known for being pretty challenging, but it does have a couple accessibility things, like the button mapping is the biggest one. A lot of the games I play have that, where you can sort of tailor the controls to your own preference, which is useful because, if you have mobility issues, right? Say there's a button on the controller that's harder to reach or maneuver, you can do something else with that. Or again, like I said, another example of this not just being a good accessibility thing, but also just being good for a customer, right? If, like me, you're very used to B meaning jump and you play a game where that instead means like punch, it'll just be a little bit annoying and you can button map. So another example, just where not only is it good because it's accessible, but also it's just like, it's not going to hurt, right? A lot of these accessibility things, like even the more intense ones, like audiovisual descriptive service or sound mapping and stuff like that. Worst case scenario, the player just doesn't need them and doesn't use them and then moves on. Which is, I think, why a lot more people are adding this sort of stuff to games, because it doesn't ruin the experience for people who don't need it because it's not there. And the people who do need it turn it on and now get to play your game. Let me think. Sorry, I'm trying to, my complaint about the one game I play that does have some accessibility issues, but I don't know if you wanted to talk about that or if you just wanted to talk about the good ones. So let me remember the other games. Feel free to describe another one of your own.
I mean, Hotline Miami is an interesting case because it is a case of it's difficult to do universal design for everything if you have a specific vision. But I do think that they probably could get away with a couple.
Yeah, it also, I mean, it was made by like two Russian guys in their basement, if I remember right. So another thing where it's a little harder to be harsh on them because they were struggling in 2012 was just these two guys. And that's why, we talked about Nintendo, like the Switch and their games have a lot of accessibility issues. And that's crazy because that's like, they're a huge game developer. And the fact that they don't even have things like adjusting subtitles or control differences like that was very surprising to me when I watched the video. I had no idea. But
Yeah, and
yeah,
that's why things like the Encodification Guide by Able Gamers is so important because it has this ginormous guide of how you can make games more accessible, and both indie gamers and large like AAA game developers alike can use a resource like that.
yeah, and I think the other thing is, like we were saying, how you can't make every game accessible, right? I realized we alluded to Hotline Miami and then didn't explain what it was. Apologies. It's uh, it's characterized by insane and psychedelic flashing colors and very difficult combat that features a lot of things happening all at once around you. And so, just sort of by its very nature, it's designed to make someone who doesn't have processing issues, or someone like me who has, I don't know, moderate ones. I have ADHD, but it's nothing crazy, right? I can play games. Uh, Someone like me already gets incredibly stressed out, and it's just sort of no amount of audio descriptive service will make that playable for a blind person. Or I guess you could, but it would be incredibly challenging and very, very chaotic because already using both sight and sound, you're going to miss things a lot of the time. But that's okay, right? Like the fact that there are games out there that won't be as easily made accessible isn't an excuse for things like Paper Mario, a game which is, as far as I know, not known for its punishing difficulty and traumatizing visuals. Like and I think that's the big point of the video, right? Was it's unrealistic to expect every single game to do every single accessibility thing. But that list, the one that you sent me, has like all of the really big things in there. And it's like, these should all just be in a game, like subtitles. It's almost unheard of to have a game without subtitles now. And even games that have bad subtitles at least are putting them in. Sorry, hang on. I'm going to go and look at the list again while you finish up your thoughts. I keep interrupting you. I'm sorry. Feel free to jump in and cut me off. Your guest at any time.
No, that is totally fine. Let me just look at my notes real quick, talking about accessibility features. Do you want to switch to why it's important? Because we've talked a lot about accessibility features and how we want them in, and there definitely should be some sort of floor for accessibility. I know that we say that we shouldn't expect all games to be able to be perfectly accessible, but we should at least have that floor, like you said, with closed captionings or being able to change the UI or being able to change the text size or making sure that the subtitles are large and high contrast, or at least being able to choose whether you want the subtitles to be tiny
Yeah,
or
or that
large.
another thing that I just remembered from the video, or that, it won't give someone playing it an epileptic seizure, which apparently Cyberpunk 2077 did pretty early on in its development, which isn't technically an accessibility thing. I know we mentioned that off mic, but it's another thing where it's the sort of thing where if you're building a game, you should bear in mind that sequences of bright flashing lights can cause problems for people, and you should, maybe include a warning up top. Another game I really like, Katana Zero, does that because it features like staticky bursts and things like that. And right up top it says, "Hey, there's flashing lights in this game. Be careful." And I think things like that as well should also be standard, right? Because that's not just convenience or like making it so people with disabilities can have fun playing games. That's a matter of actual safety, right? So another thing that I feel like they're part of the floor should be, hey, make sure your game doesn't hurt anybody by existing.
Yeah, make sure that it can't hurt anybody, make sure that everybody can enjoy it to the best of their ability. And there are a couple reasons why that is just so important. And one of them, the big one, is simply that in the US alone, there are 46.3 million estimated players with disabilities. That is a huge portion of the population, and that's just in the US. And that's just estimated gamers based off of the amount of gamers that there currently are and the percentage of people with disabilities there are. So that's just already like that's a huge market that you're not playing to, just to think about it from the capitalistic sense. You want your game to be enjoyed by everybody. You want to make those sales. You want and hopefully, especially if you're an indie developer, you want people to enjoy your art because gaming games are an art, right?
Mhm.
And to make it accessible, then you widen the range of people who can enjoy that.
Yeah, and I think the other reason that that floor is so important to keep in mind, right, is that 43 million statistic, 43 million gamers, right? Many of them have disabilities that are very easily helped by accessibility things, right? Like the standard ones, like color blindness is another one that many games have. Where like I liked the example they gave in the video, Among Us, the little video game where you play as the silly little astronauts, right? There's one of the little jobs you do is you connect wires of different colors, and colorblind people were like, "Hey, this is hard because I can't tell these colors apart." So they added little symbols on them. And I've seen a lot of games do things like that, where it's like, if something's blue, it also has a little box on it. Or if it's red, it has a little X on it. So that way you can see it even if it's harder. There are some other games that let you like customize the color palettes so it all pops out. And that sort of thing is that's going to help a lot of people, right? Because things like color blindness or just general accessibility stuff like that, like button mapping, while they're very simple and a lot of people won't need them, that so drastically expands your player base that it's still kind of crazy to me that there's games out there that don't do that, that have huge budgets and are more than capable of doing so.
Yeah, you said it better than I could.
Oh, sorry. Let
No, I mean that as a full compliment. You are doing great.
me take my podcaster boyfriend on. I hope he doesn't talk too much.
No, this is exactly why I brought you on. Uh, I'm glad that you enjoyed the video so thoroughly. But I did some of my own research, I promise, and I looked at an article called "Video Game Accessibility: A Legal Approach" to look at some of the benefits of gaming, to talk about why it's so important to have that floor and so important to have accessibility in gaming. And the first one that they talk about is child development. And they say, other than developing self worth and confidence by besting their peers, multiplayer video games can provide a test site where children can practice give and take through in game activities. Video games also provide a way for children with disabilities to socialize through competitive play that may not be accessible to them through physical games like baseball or bowling. And video games can also purge negative feelings and promote positive moods, teach leadership skills such as meditation, persuasion, and motivation, and foster creativity, which I like totally see when I was a kid. Like I was a very socially anxious kid. So one of the ways that I was able to kind of like navigate social situations and make friends was through multiplayer games like Mario Kart and Mario Party. So that was a big thing. And then creativity, you had things like, and I'm bringing up mostly Nintendo games here, even though Nintendo unfortunately isn't very accessible. But they had the Pokemon drawing game, which my friends and I were all really interested in. I know a lot of artists who started off with that game. So just listening to that, I kind of like think back, like even to to my life and to my childhood. Any thoughts?
I did not play video games as a child, so unfortunately not. I was out touching grass and reading books, the last of my kind.
The last of your kind. But yeah, I just think that like even with like what I had, it was a way that I could make friends, even as somebody who like wasn't really into sports. So like really for any child. And that's the way that a lot of this goes, is again under that idea of universal design where it kind of works for everybody, but especially people with disabilities. So some of the other ones that they discussed were cognitive and intellectual benefits. So video games can teach higher order thinking skills such as strategic thinking, interpretive analysis, problem solving, plan formulation, execution, and adaptation, to rapid change. It apparently cannot teach me reading. Uh, though actually there are video games that do that for younger kids. So that's really interesting. Any thoughts
Yeah,
about
and
that
that
one?
I was gonna say that one, of course, is pretty dependent upon the video game, right? Like there are some video games that I do not want my disabled children to play, right? Like uh, like a crazy first person shooter, something like that. Of course, obviously, but yeah, I think the I'm glad that the culture is shifting away from the sort of reflexive dislike of video games as a concept, or like the thought that they have no worth or value, because they can be very cool. And, even if they don't have worth or value, they're also fun. So, like, I'm glad that there are studies showing that they have some benefits. 'Cause it's like, oh, okay, I haven't wasted my entire life playing these things.
Yeah, and of course, the cognitive and intellectual one is for like any age as well. So it's talking about like there are a bunch of like strategy games. Like if you think like Fire Emblem is kind of like chess but fantasy. So you're thinking of like it. They also help you with focus is one thing that I've learned in terms of those higher order skills. So certain games can actually be really good if you have ADHD, which we do, because they help you maintain focus for longer periods of time as opposed to, like watching 6-second TikToks and making your attention worse.
I have
Um,
sunk hours into Hades, um, for instance.
oh, yes,
Uh,
for sure.
Another game that has lots of good accessibility options to it, actually. Uh, so that's cool. Um, let's see. What are the other? Hang on. You have a list of the little statistics and facts here. Sorry, I'm trying to remember where I am. I'm looking at the little outline you sent me.
Yes, and so I can get into the other ones in a second, but you mentioned that we have this shift going from seeing games as kind of like useless and the origin for bad things like violence to having benefits. And I think that shift is very slowly happening. It hasn't like fully turned. It's coming into popular culture definitely more so, but I think in mainstream media it's still kind of an excuse for certain bad things that happen that I will not touch on too hard. But I think that's why discussions like this are very important and research like that are very important, because we need to talk about what games can do for people, because if we don't talk about what games can do for people and why they're important for people, then we won't get that accessibility, unfortunately, because it's going to be seen as a waste of time because games are devalued.
Very well put.
So, some of the other ones that we were talking about in terms of benefits to people is that, according to the article, games can provide stress relief and promote entrepreneurial behaviors and increase moral awareness. It's like a lot of your walking simulators that make you make a choice and you feel bad about one of them. It does help you kind of like get the idea of between right and wrong in those stories as well. They also note that games may provide a benefit to self identity as they present a sustainable hobby to both abled and disabled people. So, for example, if you become disabled later on in life, you have that hobby to hold on to, and that piece of you is still there. But if games can't be accessible, if you don't make games accessible, then you are taking away a part of somebody if they become disabled later on. Like, even if you become disabled due to age, you lose your sight, you lose your mobility. Suddenly, you don't have that hobby. that a lot of people, when they identify as gamers, when they play games, they hold very dear. And it's also an ability to connect to people. Like I said earlier, I am a huge fan of party games. And if I were somehow no longer able to participate in those party games, that would be devastating because that's a way that I connect to people. And it's also a safe, like I said before, it's a safe way for me to connect to people when I'm feeling socially anxious or like I can't process a situation very well. So that's another one. Any thoughts on that one, Matthew?
Ditto. We've reversed roles. Now you're being more talkative, which is good.
Yes, very nice. We take turns here. We take turns.
Very true. On and off mic.
All right. So the last one I have here is that accessibility also opens games up to people who don't have fast reflex, patience, or a lifetime of experience with button-covered joysticks, or who are merely getting old, like I said before. And if for whatever reason somebody has trouble with a quick time event or some other routine or roadblock without accessibility controls, you've pretty much ruined the game for them. And that is from an article from Polygon. And I think that's a big thing. Like if a game doesn't have subtitles, it's like dialogue heavy, it's ruined. If a game doesn't like have a way for you to get a tutorial or to work around something, it's it's completely ruined for somebody, and they can no longer enjoy it.
Okay, now I will add something because I'm still mad about this. Doom 3, the the Doom games, pretty famously, pretty light on plot. They're just action. The one game where they gave it a plot and a lot of dialogue. There's no subtitles. So I can't play it. I just sort of it remains downloaded on my Switch and I gaze at it longingly. One day I'll be able to play it, but I can't. Be better, Bethesda.
See, that's a good example. That's a good example of a game being completely ruined because it doesn't have accessibility features, and it's so annoying that it's like the one game where they decided to give it a plot. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry, Matt.
I mean it's funny, but it's also deeply annoying because to be fair, like for me, that just means I have to wait until I'm in a different place or I'm more comfortable playing handheld, so it won't be like an issue for everybody else in the house to hear me very loudly playing Doom. Uh, but like if I was deaf, right, I just can't play the game. Like there are apparently like features later on where you need to be able to hear things happening in the game for it to happen, and I guess you're just out of luck. So it's bad. That's my bad example. I wanted to keep it positive, but I'm mad about Doom 3, the game that came out I think almost 20 years ago, but I will never forgive it.
Yeah, that's where sound mapping comes in as well. I believe Fortnite like of all games has the sound like in what sound is coming from and what direction it's coming from. It'll point to it, I believe,
Yeah, and I know
or it'll have it on
people
the screen.
yeah, I know people who again don't have any hearing disabilities but just play it because they're like, "Oh, yeah, this makes things easier. Why wouldn't I do this?" Right? And it's the thing. It's generally I find it is better to give players more options just as a safe rule, right? Cuz that means that people are more likely to continue playing it if they can make it the closer you can get it to someone's ideal gaming experience, the better because they're going to like it more.
Yeah, and one final point on its importance is I think that in a post COVID world, we have discovered how much more important video games can be, especially since games like It Takes Two, you can play with somebody just anywhere, wherever they are. There's been a rise in co op games where you can play with your friends online. And there has also been a rise in the market for those online subscriptions for Switch Online or Xbox Live or whatever the PlayStation version is. And we've realized that we're trying any way to make us less isolated and making games accessible and being able to play with each other remotely and communicate with each other remotely and share these experiences is really important. Any closing thoughts?
I'm mad about Doom 3, but Doom Eternal has subtitles, so thank you for that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Matthew. I really appreciate your input. And thank you guys for listening.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. Bye.